a call for judicial inquiry into the criminal act of oil theft, now sabotaging our national economy, being text of a press conference by Chief Dr. Edwin Kiagbodo Clark, held on Tuesday, 11th of October, 2022 in Abuja. My attention and that of the entire country have been drawn to the recent discovery of a large-scale and sophisticated oil theft machinery going on at the deep swamps at Yokri, close to the Forcados terminal. According to reports, high-powered technological engineering expertise is applied to steal crude oil from the Forcados line and transported through a 4-kilometer pipeline to a platform in the sea, which belongs to the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, NNPCL, and its partners. This report also states that as much as 200,000 barrels of crude oil are being stolen from there every day, and that this has been going on since 2014. According to NNPCL, this is part of the 470,000 barrels of crude oil that is being lost every month, amounting to $700 million. Although the NNPCL think these have been going on in the past 20 years, some of us have always insisted that this oil theft has been going on for much longer, for about 50 years. In retrospect, my visit to Forcados Oil Terminal in the company of Alhaji Shehu Shagari, then as Federal Commissioner of Finance in 1972, while I was the Commissioner for Finance of Midwest State, was quite revealing. During that visit, we clearly observed that there were no proper accounts or records of what is being exported through the Forcados terminal, the 4 kilometers pipeline. The news that there is an illicit 4 kilometers pipeline through which crude oil is being siphoned goes to confirm what I have always said over the years, and what the leaders of the Niger Delta have been shouting about, that the issue of oil theft is being perpetuated by some mafia-like groups with the connivance of some people in the oil industry, using sophisticated engineering methods to carry out their nefarious acts. Even more disturbing is that these activities have been going on over the years under the watchful eyes of the military and security personnel. Security personnel who are supposed to be protecting these oil pipelines with the large numbers of gunboats to patrol the area are unfortunately alleged to be involved in these criminal acts. The host communities from where these oil explorations are carried out, but who are victims of these activities, since they cannot dictate to the oil companies and security officials, have always raised the alarm that the quantum of oil theft going on is nothing compared to what the artisanal refinery operators are doing. What is going on is a sophisticated criminal act carried out by a syndicate. The investigation to this matter must be full, open, and comprehensive if there is sincerity to unravel what is going on. There must be no sacred cows. It is particularly pleasing to note that it is the private security company operated by Chief Government Ekpe Mupolo, alias Tompolo, Tantita Security Services Limited, and the community youths whom he has recruited that have brought this shameful act to the public, and not the NNPCL and its partners, nor the military. When the revelation was made, some government officials and some heads of security arms embarked on a visit to the creeks to see for themselves the discovery. In the team that embarked on the visit, apart from the Chief of Defense Staff, General Lucky Irabo, and the Managing Director of Tantita Security Services Limited, Keston Pondi, the other government officials interviewed are from the northern part of the country. This brings to the fore once again the marginalization and neglect of the people of the Niger Delta. We therefore once again demand that these people, who have been dominating the oil industry, may need to explain why these nefarious acts have been going on for this long in the Niger Delta. The investigation into this matter, which has been affecting the national economy so badly, must uncover all government officials, including the military, top officials of NNPCL and their collaborators, who have inflicted such magnitude of harm on the country and on the Niger Delta communities, endangering the life and well-being of the people of the oil-bearing communities. They live largely in opulence on the blood of the people of the communities that produce the oil. It is dangerously incredible that crude oil theft, despite all the securities around, has assumed a wider dimension, to the extent that the quantity of crude oil we export today is less than the quantity being stolen by a gang of thieves of various designations. The stealing of crude oil is a well-managed cartel of government officials, the oil companies, and the security agents. Therefore, it is unfair and unjust to accuse the inhabitants of the oil-producing areas or host communities of being responsible for the stealing of crude oil. While not defending these host communities, the stealing of crude oil being carried out by these groups of individuals are very minimal or negligible as compared with the industrial stealing by some international organizations in collaboration with some members of the security forces. The host communities of the Niger Delta people are not involved in the marketing and the lifting of oil of this magnitude. Today, the people of the Niger Delta are amongst the poorest people in the country. This cannot continue forever. Due to my constant criticism against the federal government and the NNPCL on the operation of the oil industry in the Niger Delta, and my consistently drawing the attention of the federal government and the NNPCL about the employment policy in the oil industry, whereby the majority of the workers, particularly at the managerial cadres, are northerners, I have been singled out and branded an enemy of the federal government and as an anti-North, and not to be patronized by the government. Conviction of admirals confirms naval's role in oil theft. Typical evidence to show that the military are involved is contained in the analysis of the report on the arrest of the MT African Pride off Forgados Terminal on the 8th of October 2003, whereby 3 senior naval officers were tried, and I narrate hereunder the extract of that case. The Nigerian Navy has sacked and demoted 2 admirals for their role in the disappearance of a tanker vessel which had been arrested for transporting 11,000 tons of stolen crude oil. The ruling, announced by a court-martial on Wednesday, confirmed long-held suspicions that some of Nigeria's top military commanders are personally involved in bunkering the theft of crude oil in the Niger Delta for the sale to tankers waiting offshore. Oil company officials estimate that the racket, conducted by heavily armed gangs, creams off up to 10% of Nigeria's oil production of the nearly 2.5 million barrels per day. The 2-month court-martial in Lagos ruled that Rear Admirals Francis Agbiti and Samuel Kolawole should be demoted to the rank of Commodore and dismissed from the Navy for their negligence in allowing the arrested tanker African Pride to escape from Navy custody in Lagos Harbour in August 2004. A third defendant, Rear Admiral Antonio Bob Manuel, was found innocent of all charges. The African Pride had been intercepted on the high seas on 8th of October 2003 near Royal Dutch Shell's Forgados Oil Export Terminal and was found to have taken on board 11,000 tons of crude oil without authorization. Its 13-man Russian crew was arrested and is still awaiting trial by a Lagos court. Rear Admiral Joseph Ajayi, the president of the court-martial, said Agbeti and Kolawole had failed in their duty to protect Nigeria's oil wealth, the source of more than 90% of the country's export earnings. No matter how painful, we shall be failing in our responsibility if the appropriate punishment is not meted out, he said in the court-martial's final ruling. The two senior officers appear to have got off lightly without being sent to jail. At the same time, the court-martial's verdict constituted a harsh indictment of the Navy itself. For the first time ever, it provided official confirmation of long-held suspicions that top Navy officers were deeply involved in bunkering. Military prosecutors said Agbeti had attempted to release the African Pride on the very day it was seized. The tanker's cargo of crude oil was illegally transferred to another ship 3 weeks later, while the vessel remained in Navy custody. Court papers showed that Kolawole had allowed Russian officials to visit the ship without authorization, and that he later ensured there was no guard on board the ship when it disappeared around 10th of August 2004. Prosecutors further alleged that Agbeti and Kolawole were responsible for the simultaneous alteration, destruction, and removal of documents following the ship's disappearance. Two junior Navy officers, Jonathan Ihejiawu and Suleiman Atan, told the court-martial that they were paid 250,000 naira each, or 1,850 US dollars, by one Lieutenant Commander Mohammed Abubakar on 31st of October 2003 to escort the MT African Pride from Lagos Harbour to the high seas, where its cargo was transferred to a waiting ship and replaced by seawater. The two junior officers said Abubakar had told them the payment was from the big boys in the Navy. Multinational oil companies have repeatedly expressed concern about the activities of sophisticated criminal gangs that illegally tap crude oil from pipelines in the mangrove swamps and creeks of the Niger Delta, where most of Nigeria's oil is produced. Besides triggering the court-martial of 3 senior Navy officers, the disappearance of the African Pride gave rise to a parliamentary investigation. Testimony to this inquiry has suggested that the overall head of the Navy may himself have been involved in the bunkering. Navy Captain Peter Duke, who was formerly in charge of guarding arrested ships, told the inquiry committee that Vice Admiral Samuel Afolaya, the Chief of Staff of the Navy, had forced him to release another ship seized for dealing illegally in crude oil, the Moab trader. Crude oil theft is definitely part of the universal corruption that is killing Nigeria. The federal and state governments do not seriously tackle the issue of eradication of corruption in our country. The stealing is not only done through pipelines, both onshore and underwater, and even the oil terminals where the export of crude oil is carried out. Another thing we discovered later is that apart from these government officials at the oil terminals and the international oil company officials, there is a military cabal very much involved in the theft of oil. I observed from my own investigations that some military officers, cutting across all ranks, lobby their way to be posted to the Niger Delta in order to be involved in the stealing of oil. And this is indeed very dangerous. In 1999, immediately after the assumption of office by President Olusegun Obasanjo, about 40 Ijaw, Urobo, and Ishekiri leaders were invited to a meeting in Abuja by the President, to resolve the fratricidal war between the three ethnic nationalities. The visit was an offshoot of President Obasanjo's visit to the Niger Delta. I was the leader of the Ijaw delegation. Chief O.P. Edodo was the leader of the Ishekiri delegation, and Chief Benjamin Okumagba was the leader of the Urobo delegation. Stealing of crude oil was one of the issues discussed at that meeting. When it was turned to speak, I made categorical accusations in the presence of all government officials who were sitting on the opposite side that the military, particularly the Navy, had a hand in the stealing of the oil. President Olusegun Obasanjo immediately set up a panel headed by General T.Y. Danjuma, who was then the Minister of Defense, to investigate my allegations against the security forces. Other members of the panel included a traditional ruler from Delta State, His Royal Majesty, the Obi of Owa. General T.Y. Danjuma's panel went to the Niger Delta and investigated the allegations. The reports of that panel are there in the archives of the presidency. So I'm not just saying that these people are involved. They were involved and are still involved up till today. Bunkering by the Niger Delta youths. It is now clear that the impression that the massive oil stealing is being perpetrated mostly by the Niger Delta youths was deliberately created by the oil industry officials to cover their criminal acts. Now, by the grace of God, Chief Government Ekpemu Polo, or Tom Polo's security company, Tantita Security Services Limited, has found out the truth. The refusal of the oil companies and the NNPCL to engage the youths of the Niger Delta, even though they are qualified, is responsible for their finding a way of survival by engaging in bunkering. As I have always said, they do not do the sophisticated type of bunkering. They do what I call buckets or jerry cans bunkering. None of them can hire a boat like the MT African Pride from abroad for the purpose of stealing. They could make their own local boats. I list hereunder some typical examples of their frustrations. Number one, for instance, in a lecture I gave at the Nigerian Institute of Advanced Legal Studies, NIALS, I said that our youths, young graduates who attend National Youth Service Corps, NYSC, in faraway places, outside their own state, who return home at the end of their one-year national service, return home to joblessness, despite the fact that there are companies operating in their area and communities. Whereas their counterparts from other parts of Nigeria, who are posted to the Niger Delta, at the end of the 1 year are retained by the oil companies because the management positions are occupied by their people. So they get employed, while our boys and girls return home without jobs. 2. These jobless boys have nothing to do, have nothing to live and survive on. I had stated a case before in 1986 in Warri. There was a fight between some of these Niger Delta youths and the security forces at the Warri airport. At that time, the airport was a narrow strip along the airport road Warri. What happened when I got there was that I saw that 2 of the boys had been shot dead by the security forces. What was the problem? The Niger Delta youths said that they were told that one of the overseas oil companies was recruiting divers and swimmers from outside the Niger Delta, and that these recruits were being carried in helicopters to the Escravos and to the Forcados terminals. The youths protested, saying that they were available to be recruited, adding that they are natural swimmers and divers, yet they were not being employed. Rather, the companies would go outside the region to employ people who even had to be taught how to swim and how to dive. That was the arrangement of things, and that was responsible for the fight. Number 3. There was another case where the Niger Delta youths had been shortchanged and discriminated against in their own home by the NNPC officials in Warri. One day, I was forced to visit the Warri refinery to see things for myself, and I thought I was in Kaduna, because the majority of the boys were wearing Baba Riga dress with northern caps, speaking Hausa language. The majority of the northerners were full staff of the corporation, while most of the southerners were temporary and casual staff. The northern staff were put over and above the southern staff that are permanent, and they were paid more. Whenever there's a retrenchment, it affects the southerners because their position is temporary and casual. When the refinery is not working, they dropped all the southern staff and kept the northern staff. Only the jobs of the northern staff were secured. Some of the northerners were posted to other subsidiaries of the NNPC, while the southern staff lost their jobs completely. The southern staff that had worked for 10 years and above and wanted to be confirmed were not confirmed. When the southerners were retrenched, most of the people that remained were northerners, and they were being paid. While I'm not against employing northerners, the level of discrimination against the southerners is appalling. The youths of the Niger Delta have had to look for a means of survival. This is not, however, to support their activities. I am therefore using this opportunity to again appeal to my fellow Nigerians who have taken over the ownership and management of the oil industries in the Niger Delta, the NNPCL in particular, to employ our youths into the various departments of the oil industry, and not to make them beggars in their own home. The unity of Nigeria can only be kept if the citizens are all equal, and everybody has the opportunity to climb to the highest office in his or her country. I also want to use this medium to commend Chief Government Ekpemu Polo, or Tom Polo, and his company, Tantita Securities Limited, for this huge discovery and exposure of such criminal acts against the state. It definitely has proved that the award of the surveillance contract to him was not misplaced. And finally, I want to advise the federal government to institute a judicial inquiry to investigate this criminal act of oil theft, and also to once again appeal that jobs should be provided for the teeming unemployed youths. Modular refineries should be built to replace the illegal refineries currently being operated, and which do not only affect the economy of the country, but are also devastating the Niger Delta environment. The international oil companies, or IOCs, should be directed, once again, and this time with sincerity of purpose, to relocate their operational headquarters to the Niger Delta region, if there is a genuine desire to end this menace. Thank you. Chief Dr. Edwin Kyagbado Clark, OFR, CON.
Thank you. I have for some time now kept quiet because I lost my brother, Ambassador B.A. Clark, who was Nigerian permanent representative at the United Nations and permanent secretary, Minister of External Affairs. But what is going on in my region is worrisome. If I regard myself as a safe man, so I thought I should come out to say something that if we are not careful, the whole economy will collapse. bunkering or oil stealing is part of Nigerian corruption, which has infested almost everybody. And we cannot continue unless something is done. Previously, the government officials, the NNPC officials, they all believe that the stealing of the crude oil, which was brought to the notice of Nigerians by the managing director of NNPC Limited, is worrisome to everybody. So, my appeal to the federal government, therefore, is that a judicial inquiry should be set up to investigate the activities of the bunkers or those who are stealing the oil, yet they are investigating who stole it. Until this Tompolo was employed, his company was employed to do the job he is now doing. Within a short time, he has now discovered that a 4-kilometer pipeline into the sea has been discovered. And I think very soon he will discover more. I commend him for a job well done. And I believe that very soon the stealing of oil will be reduced. I also want to say that it's not true that bunkering, oil stealing, crude oil stealing has just started. That is not true. These are started since about 50 years ago. I remember in 1972, as Commissioner for Finance in Midwest State, I accompanied Judicial, who was then Federal Minister of Finance, to Focado's terminal. What did we see? We saw the official fiddling and we asked, is there no way of checking the oil that we were exporting? And no one gave us a satisfactory answer. And when we came back, this matter was taken up, but nobody followed later. Again, let me tell you where I was involved again. During the fratricidal war in Warri, between the Chekiri, the Jaws of Warri, and the Robos of Warri, the president of Nigeria at that time, President Olusegun Obasanjo, invited us, he has invited us to Abuja to find a way of resolving the matter. And we all attended the meeting. And the issue of oil stealing was one of the matters discussed. What happened? I stood up and I accused the military, all the security forces, of being part of those who steal the crude oil. And the person asked me, can you prove it? I said, yeah. So he set up General Danjuman's committee, who was the Minister of Defense at the time. All the officials were present. And one of the members of the committee was Obi of Agbo, and I'm sorry, was the Obi of Owan. A Federal second. And General Danjuma, as a leader, wanted to the Niger Delta. I investigated my allegation. His report is in the presidency. They should look for it. To say again that oil bunkering has been on for years. Outside the issue of the African pride, which happened in 2003 during the passenger time, where it was discovered that the Navy was fully involved. An inquiry was set up by the Navy, and 3 admirals were tried. Bob Manuel was one of them. He was the only one freed. The other 2, what are their name? I can't remember their name. No. They were freed. But the evidence given during the investigation or during the inquiry showed that it went beyond one officer, one cadre. It passed from one cadre to another. A situation whereby, you see from the report, the sum of 250,000 naira were given to 2 officers. Those officers were some senior officers. Shows clearly that the Navy or the Army is not the only one. But the government officials, the NSPC officials, should be investigated. Today, people now build houses in Abuja, drive big cars, fly, what do you call the private jets, and you ask, what is the occupation of these people? Nobody knows. And nobody will ask. Some of these people in the morning go to church for blessing. And they are always in the front seat of the church. What type of country are we building? I have also mentioned in the paper the reason why the Niger Delta youth are engaged in oil bunkering. I am not defending them, but at the same time, they are doing it for survival. I remember I gave a lecture in Lagos one day, and I said, our youth from the Niger Delta, who are posted to the north, to the south, east, and to the southwest, return home at the end of the year without a job in those states. But their counterparts from the north, from the west, from the southeast, are posted to our area, are employed in the oil industry because the managers, the senior managers, and the managing directors of the NNPC are their brothers. And the ethnicity is one. Ethnicity is one of the things killing Nigeria. So our boys they can't move, nothing to do. I remember in 1986, I'm still very vivid, I was in my house when the security forces came to me that our boys were fighting. I should follow them to help them to stop the fight because I'm their leader. I went to the airport, airstrip, which was at the airport road in Warri, not the present aerodrome, airport. I discovered that when I got there, 2 boys were already dead. And what was happening? They told me that the boys now complained that they were informed that youths from other area, other than the Niger Delta, were being employed by the companies, oil companies, to be employed as divers and swimmers, to be trained when they get. And they said, as riverine people, they are natural swimmers, natural divers. Why were they not being employed? That's what they fight. I have to see that these bodies, the 2 bodies, were taken to their parents to be buried. That is the problem. You cannot be in your home and not benefit from what is being done, what is coming out of your home. I think this is the main problem. And it cannot continue. The situation whereby if you are allowed to, nobody bothers you when you are digging for gold in Zamfara. Nobody bothers you when you are digging gold in Osun State and so on. But the situation whereby young men are being killed or being accused and detained, it's not good enough. So this is the problem. And now, again, I'm saying that the federal government should appoint a judicial commission of inquiry to look into this issue of crude oil stealing in the Niger Delta. There should be no sacred cows. Everybody who is involved in the oil industry should be invited if there's evidence. So once again, I thank you all. Thank you, and God bless.